Welcome to the Remnant by Reclaim 611 podcast. I'm Paula.
And I'm Carrie.
And January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month. And so today we are going to have a personal story, something that is very near and dear to Carrie. We're going to talk about something today. I think it's going to be very interesting, and I'm sure you all will enjoy this story. Many of you may not know this about Carrie, and I'm going to let her tell you a little bit about how she interacted with someone who was connected to someone who was trafficked and how that literally changed her life, probably for the rest of her life.
Mm-hmm. Yep, so true. It's an exciting story.
All right. Well, tell the listeners a little bit about your story. What happened? It was through someone else, right, that you were connected to this person who had been trafficked?
Actually, she was my patient.
Okay.
So this was like 2016, I believe. And I had a patient. We're going to call her Jess.
Okay.
Because, so her name's Jess. Mm-hmm. And, when I met her, there's just something different about Jess. And to me, she ticked all these red flags for trafficking. And although I didn't think she was actively being trafficked, I knew she had a story. It was so evident. And as we got to talking, I asked her more questions and more questions. She finally started telling me about her sexual abuse as a child. And then she went into how that affected her as an adolescent and running away, and then ended up being trafficked, which led to all of this history of drug abuse and cycle of just criminal activity and all of these things. And just really, she was looking finally to end this cycle in her life. Like, she was done, and she had just gotten out of jail.
Okay.
Like probably 3 weeks before I met her.
Mm-hmm.
And, I did something that I don't always do, but I felt in the moment that I gave her my information, and I was like, listen, I don't know how I can help you, but if I can connect you with resources or things like that, or if you just need someone to talk to, go ahead and reach out to me.
Mm-hmm. You felt safe in that moment. You felt
I did.
comfortable in that moment to do that.
I did. There was something about Jess that made me comfortable. And she was so open and honest about all of these horrific things, even personal things that she did, and so transparent. I just felt like I could trust her, and that she might actually reach out to me. So I've probably done that a couple times in my career, but usually people are like, oh, thank you so much. And they don't, nothing comes to fruition. But Jess contacted me, and probably within 10 hours of seeing her that night, and just sent me thanks so much for, talking with me, and I would love to connect with you. So fast forward about a year of knowing Jess and walking through a lot of things and helping her kind of get connected in the community and helping her get her first job she ever had outside of prostitution.
So was this connection with Jess actually kind of like the first start to Reclaim 611? Was she like the first victim?
She was.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah, she was really the first survivor. We really got to come around and love on her and help her.
Okay.
And using outside resources and outside connections. But she really was the first one we got to hands-on work with, talk with, and learn from. Learn from would be my key there. I learned more from her than any book or any lecture I could have ever read or listened to.
So what are some things that Reclaim was able to do for Jess?
Well, she did not have an ID. Okay. So and she didn't have a car and all of those transportation things. So although this is not an order, we started with getting her ID, taking her where she needed to go to get the documentation she needed to do things like get a job, which you think are really simple, but when you're homeless and you don't have a job and you have a criminal background is incredibly difficult. And then going to, there are places who help with kind of, I'm lacking the word, but when you get out of jail, re-entry is the word I'm looking for. Some re-entry programs to talk with her about her options. So we got her connected there. But it turned out that actually it was somebody within one of our team members' churches who ended up offering Jen a job in a restaurant.
Okay.
And this was literally her first job she'd ever had outside of prostitution. Wow. And she, at this point, was probably like early 30s.
Okay.
So that was really exciting. So we'll kind of start it there because that's kind of where she meets the contact that I was able to connect with, and is kind of part of the story that we're getting to, right? The climax of it.
Right. But before we get to it, I want to ask, because we talked about on our last podcast, when people want to volunteer and want to get into the fight, we talked about it being important to have the education about it and knowledge about it. What are some things you learned from Jess that you didn't learn from the books?
That's a great question. I think just the reality of listening to somebody it became reality. Mm-hmm. Like all of these things you are reading and all of these things you are studying, and then for someone to be sitting there and now you can actually ask questions and get answers that aren't just in a textbook or in an article. And to hear what you were thinking, how you were feeling, the drug abuse, the vicious cycle of abuse, how you felt towards your trafficker, why you stayed, the manipulation, the force, fraud, and coercion, to truly understand what that looks like through the eyes of Shira's trafficking started at 12.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so really early. So to understand both for Jess, it was unique because she was a victim of child sex trafficking, but she also ended up being in prostitution for years and years and years.
Okay.
Because that's all she ever knew. Mm-hmm. And then also to understand, even when she said she was just prostituting and that she was doing it on her own, there was always an element of coercion there. Okay. It really wasn't freedom. Like her really doing it on her own, when you really got down to talk to her, if there was a quota or if there was somebody else that was managing her money, there usually was. And so kind of shedding light on that wasn't actually your own choice. Mm-hmm. And seeing, just sometimes we judge prostitution and we look at it at a different lens, and really to see that, as we know, like, what was the statistic? Like 95% of prostitution is actually trafficking. And so really to see that and see it in her life, and then the vicious cycle of criminal activity as well. Mm-hmm. And if you really don't have the resources to come behind you and help you, like, this is a forever cycle.
Right. So when you say prostitution, you're referring to after she became over 18.
Yes. Well, and when she considered it not being her trafficker.
Okay.
When she felt like she was keeping her own money, and even though she probably was keeping a significant amount of it, there was always an element of force or coercion by somebody in her life. Okay. It might just not have been as severe.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Okay. Gotcha. All right. So I interrupted your story as you were progressing to the climax of the story. So Jess was around for about a year, right?
Yeah.
Before she introduced you to someone else.
Yeah. So this was 2017, probably towards the end of 2017. And so she had this job, and she really loved it. And she was actually recruiting her friends and people that she knew needed jobs to get a job here, because the manager of this restaurant was incredibly gracious, and he really overlooked a lot of criminal backgrounds and gave people a chance.
Okay.
So it was really just like this whole God moment of I literally sat at this interview with her, and he asked her a couple questions that were very straightforward, non-judgmental, and he said, "You have the job." Mm-hmm. He didn't pick apart anything. He gave her the job. He gave her a chance. Mm-hmm. And so she saw that, and she wanted to kind of help some of her friends. And so they started recruiting people, and she was just so excited. And I remember just like seeing the fulfillment of having a job that was outside of something she had never done. Mm-hmm. And there was one person in particular that started working there, and her friend, we're going to call her Sam. Okay, so Sam, she was pregnant. And I remember kind of the end of 2017, Jen coming to me and being like, "Hey, I have a friend, I know her from, doing heroin and kind of the drug world, and she's now working with me, and she's pregnant, and I'm pretty sure she's using." And it just makes me so sad. And, She was like, I just don't know what to do. And so we kind of talked about it. And I had offered, like, if she ever just needs someone to talk to, I'm always willing to do that. If she needs some resources or whatever, it was just kind of this side conversation. And so anyway, probably a month, 6 weeks goes by, maybe a little bit more. I hadn't really heard much about Sam or anything else to do with that. And so we get the full story today. So in December of 2017, I actually got pregnant.
Okay. And
so this was my 5th pregnancy, and I had 2 children. So I had 2 miscarriages at that point. I'm kind of familiar, all like first trimester miscarriages. And in the end of December, I remember this day really, really well. I was driving home from Bar Method, which is my favorite workout. Just got to throw that out there. And I was driving home, and Jess calls me, and she says, "Hey, Carrie." She's like, I really think Sam's ready to talk to you, and she's really worrying me because I don't know what she's gonna do with this pregnancy, and she really just needs someone to talk to. I don't know what to say to her, and I think she's actually gonna call you. I'm like, great, just give her my phone number. It sounds good. Whatever. She's like, I'm just really worried about her. I'm like, okay. So I pull in the garage. And I had to go to the restroom. So I ran into the house, went to the restroom, and, kind of what I felt like the inevitable, right? I was bleeding. Mm-hmm. And, when you've been through something, that familiar, like, oh, I know what this feels like. Mm-hmm. I know what this is. Mm-hmm. And I remember sitting there, and I was like, really, Lord? Like, again? Mm-hmm. Like, we've been through this a couple times. Like, is this really what I think it is? And I kid you not to be graphic, but I got up and I was about to wash my hands in the bathroom and just kind of like feeling sad, and just wondering, like, is this really what I think it is? Really another miscarriage? And I literally in my spirit heard, you no longer have a viable life, but I'm giving you one to help. Oh. And I'll tell you, there's not very many times in my life where I have felt something so clearly said to me. And I just started crying, and I honestly didn't understand what that meant. I heard you no longer have a viable life very clearly. Mm-hmm. I've given you one to help. I felt like, okay, Lord, like, I trust you. Mm-hmm. And I remember saying that as I was washing my hands, like, I trust you, but I don't think, and I knew that it had to do with probably Jess, who I was about to talk with, or Sam. I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And about 2 days later, so it ended up I was miscarrying, and about 24, 48 hours later, Sam called me, and I don't know if there's very many conversations I've had with another human being that have been as beautiful as the conversation I had with her. And I'd never met her, but I just simply asked her, like, tell me your story, because she was just overwhelmed. I don't think she knew what to tell me. Mm-hmm. Lots of shame and guilt, you could tell. And I was like, just tell me your story, And she had told me she had a son, and she was a mom already. And because of addiction, that her mom had custody of him for the most part. But she was in his life, and she was actually in recovery when she got pregnant. And she was kicked out of recovery because they don't tolerate pregnancy. They don't tolerate. She wasn't pregnant when she went into the program, and they don't, promiscuity, they don't tolerate, essentially. Okay. And so since she got pregnant at the facility in rehab, she was kicked out at about 7 weeks pregnant, which is a whole other thing that makes me kind of angry. But all she knew getting kicked out of a program was the streets. Right. So she ended up in a drug house, in her first trimester, and really was using most of her pregnancy, and really just, so emotional. Mm-hmm. Just told me how much she was just really trying to use just not to be sick, and that she was trying to do all the right things. She's like, I take my vitamins, I do this. It was just like you could see the fight going on in her head. Like, she was trying to do the right thing, but she just didn't have the resources, and she just couldn't get clean. So we talked for a while about what she could do and if she wanted to get clean, and of course she said yes. She knew about every program that I had talked about that was in the Metroplex of resources to her, and she just kept saying, this isn't my baby. This isn't my baby. This isn't my baby. And I said, okay, I hear you, but how can I help you? Mm-hmm. And I was like, I started talking about adoption and like agencies and people who could help find a good home for her child. And it really kind of freaked her out. I think because of the drug use, she was just like, no, I don't know about that. I don't really want to do that. And I was like, well, listen, if I can help you find somebody who would adopt your child, it would be a good family for your child. Is that how you want me to help you? Would you want me to do that? And she started bawling hysterically. Mm. And she said, you would do that for me? And I was like, well, yeah, of course I would. Of course I would help you do that. I had no idea what I was, what I was saying right then, what that meant. But, I mean, here's a mom who knows what it's like to be a mother. Mm-hmm. She knows her own challenges. She knows her own story. And she knows that she wants to give this child a better life. Mm-hmm. And that's what she's trying to do. And, I mean, how can you say no to that, mm-hmm. right? Like, sitting in front of you, like, something has to be done. This child, and, like, she's trying to do the right thing as much as she can. So I told her I would help her. I got on the phone that night with, like, some of my, core sisters and was like, this is the conversation I had, ladies. Like, we need some prayer. Like, how can we help? How can we help Sam? So we're all brainstorming. We're all praying. We're like, and one of my contacts knew a family who had been looking to adopt for a while. And I really, God had placed that on their heart. And so we actually met with them a couple days later. And there's something that just wasn't, when something's not right in your spirit and you're just like, I think this is supposed to be me. Mm. And I don't think my husband and I said it out loud for like probably a good week, mm-hmm. but I think we both knew it. Okay. And finally, one day I was like, Ryan, this just seems too perfect. Mm. And I told him about what the Spirit had put in my heart when I walked out of that bathroom that day. And I was like, this is our baby. I was like, he said there was, you've given me one to help, but it's not just to help, it's to adopt. And, my husband looked at me like, okay, I hear you. Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to play like we were just like this moment and we were like, yes. Uh-huh. In my heart, I was a yes, and I knew the Lord was doing something, but I don't think my husband was totally convinced. Mm-hmm. So after meeting with this other couple and kind of realizing, maybe this was too quick. So I don't think I mentioned, but at this point, Sam was probably like 34 weeks pregnant. Oh, wow. Yeah. And she really hadn't had a lot of prenatal care. She didn't know the gender of the child. I don't think she'd ever had a sonogram. I might be wrong on that. Maybe she had one like very early first trimester, but other than that, she really knew nothing about the health of the baby. So we had a lot of questions. So once Ryan called me from work one day and he said, go ahead and, because we had to get an agency or an adoption attorney, right, to start the process to doing this, or even to tell or ask her if it was okay if we adopted mm-hmm. her child. And he called me from work one day and he said, listen, I just have a piece about it, so go ahead and ask her and tell her that that's what we want to do. So I was just like, I was so, that nervous excitement. Mm-hmm. I was so excited, but also really nervous on what Jess was gonna, or what Sam was gonna say. So she gets on the phone and I was like, listen, I just want you to know that, Ryan and I would really love to adopt your child if that's something that is okay with you. And she just started bawling hysterically again. Uh-huh. And was just like, would you really do that? She was like, I was really praying that it was going to be you. Yeah, I know, right? And so the waterworks and all the things. And so at that point, so she's like 34, 35 weeks pregnant. I got to go to the OB with her for her first appointment in her late third trimester. And we were really hoping to figure out the gender, mm-hmm. right? Like, okay. I really want to see this sono, and she's 100% whatever I want to know, whatever I want to be involved. She's like, you can be there in delivery. Like, you are mom. Like, I want you to be the first one to hold. this baby, like, I want you to be mom from the very beginning, and which was so beautiful and selfless. And so we went to the OB, and it turned out that they couldn't do her sono that day, and so we didn't get to figure out anything. And of course, I was mad. Like, as a medical professional,
right?
There was a lot of things dropped in the situation. And I was like, she should have gone to sono, and they just didn't prioritize her at all. And anyway, I was really upset. So I walked away, and I'm like, we still don't know the gender. We don't know anything really about her. Like, we don't know if things are okay. We don't know anything. And I remember leaving the garage of this parking structure, and the Lord's like, Carrie, do you trust me? And I was like, yes, Lord, I told you I trust you. Because I was really upset. And at this point, I'm like, we don't know anything. Like, we're about to adopt a child we know nothing about. And, but everything kind of like a peace just overcame me when he was like, do you trust me? And I'm like, yeah, of course I trust you. Like, whatever you have ahead is your will, and we're a yes to it. So we went through this process. So we got an attorney. Pretty much all the things that needed to be done were done probably within 2 weeks. And the last thing we had to do was a home study. So come and, they come talk to you. So on February 6th, early in the morning at 7 a.m. was the last thing we had to do. The lady comes, does our home visit, basically kind of like, sounds good, everything's looking really good, all the paperwork's done on both sides. We're like, fantastic. She's like, so are you having a little girl, little boy? And we're like, we have no idea. Like, so I tell her this background, and she was like, well, don't you guys work in the emergency room?
Right, exactly.
We're like, well, yeah, but we didn't really want to be in trouble. We're just trying to let things happen naturally. And she was like, oh, can't you just get her in for an ultrasound? So we're both like laughing at this point because we've thought of this, but we were just trying to
follow the right protocol.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she's like, okay, well, if it was me, I probably would have found out a way already, but whatever you guys want to do. So at this point, with all the paperwork done, we were like, okay, so how could we do this? So Ryan, at this time, he kind of arranges that if Sam wants to come in, that we can kind of get her in through the ER.
Is this going to be any incriminating information that can be used against you later?
I don't think so, Paula. I mean, at this point, who cares? Like, it's all said and done.
Right.
I mean, she's like, so Jess is like 37, 38. No, she was like 38 weeks pregnant. And so we call her up, and we're like, hey,
Sam.
how you doing? Sam, I'm sorry. See, using pseudonyms is never good for me. Sam calls me, and I was like, hey, how are you feeling? She's like, well, I'm having a little cramping here and there, but I'm okay. And I was like, hey, if you want to go through the ER, I think we can kind of get that sono and kind of get you checked out, and because all the balls have been dropped to this other place. And she's like, yeah, no problem. I'll go whenever. You just let me know. So she goes up there. They do the sonogram. She goes up into L&D, and she actually was cramping. And she calls me or texts me, and she says it's a girl. I know, so sweet. So anyway, I get all the feels, all the excitement, and she says, but they're not going to let me go because I'm like 5 centimeters dilated. I'm like, what?
Wow.
You are? And so I know that she was so nervous about everything, the process like happening and the paperwork getting done and all of the things being right, that she didn't tell anybody she was actually cramping and actually, starting labor. Yeah. So when I say that it was good that she went in, it was very good she went in.
Right.
So she's like, yeah, they're going to keep me. I'm like, of course they are, because you're 5 centimeters dilated. And about 3 hours later, she's 8 centimeters dilated. So
had you made it to the hospital yet?
Well, she hadn't gone to labor, so her boyfriend was there, and they said, we'll call you as soon as they start take her into delivery, we'll let you know so you're there. So her boyfriend actually texted me, and it was probably 8 at night, 9 at night, something like that. And he's like, hey, you can head this way. They're going to take her to the delivery room. And I'm like, great. I literally 2 seconds dressed in the car, backing up. was backing out of the car driveway, and he texted me, "Baby's here."
Wow.
Like, she pushed once, apparently,
Right.
and
The baby
flew out. Yeah, she was like 5 pounds, 11 ounces. And so Ryan, I was like, Ryan, get in the car. She's actually here. So our family member came over, and we went up there, and they took her to the NICU, and she was beautiful. Her name is Willow, which actually one of the meanings of Willow is freedom. And the hard part of the story for me when she was first born is I actually got the flu. Like, I was coming down, like, it didn't feel good that day. And by the time I got up to the hospital, like, I had the full body aches. I knew I had fever. So I did full COVID style in the back of the NICU, like face mask, everything. So I didn't get to hold her for like a week. While she was in the NICU. And she did have to detox from heroin, off narcotics. She was there for 20 days.
What kind of process is that like for a baby?
Basically, it's so different hospitals have different protocols, but for her is basically weaning her off of the narcotic. And so since the replacement for heroin in the IV drug world is, in the hospitals, is morphine. So she was actually detoxed off morphine for about 20 days. And so they watched them very closely. They gave them these, protocol amounts, and then they continuously reduce it and watched how they react. So every 2 hours, 3 hours, you're scored. You get a score. And then if the baby's in a lot of distress, then they give them additional dosages to make them comfortable, and then they slowly start the process of weaning it down. It's quite the process. I mean, this 20 days is really short for a baby in detox.
Okay.
Very short. So it was just she did an amazingly well.
So what's like the normal time?
It probably depends on how much mom was doing.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I didn't mention earlier, but one of the things Sam did is we asked her to go to the methadone clinic when we found out that she had been using street heroin, and just asked her to start that, since it does show that the baby's at least not getting street drugs.
Okay.
And that maybe the detox would be a little bit better. So she was on, she did go, and she went every morning. So she was doing the methadone as a replacement for about a month before she delivered. And so that might also, we don't know, but could have considerably helped the detox process for Willow. But yeah, she was there for 20 days, and she had a couple rough spells, but outside of that, she did really well, really well, and was out in an incredibly short amount of time for average, drug baby.
Okay. So how old is Willow now, and how is she now?
You know the answer to that question.
But the listeners don't know.
I know. So she'll be 3 this February, which is crazy. And when I tell you about a blessing of a child, she is so beautiful, first of all.
Yes, she is.
And so sweet and so smart. And she's a gift. She's a total gift from God. And knowing that, I have 3 biological children, and if you're watching YouTube, you can see my belly for this one coming out here in the next 10 weeks. But you worry kind of as a mom, as a parent, like, is it going to be different having a child who's adopted? And there's almost a richness that is not present with your own biological children. And not that you love anybody more, but of all the human beings, all of the babies in the entire world, this was meant to be part of your family, and that is something you just can't replace. Right. They're so handpicked for your family. And what's so funny is people would never know she was adopted.
Right.
Right?
Right.
She looks like the other kids. She turned blonde this summer.
Beautiful blonde. And her tan is amazing, guys.
Yeah, it is. It is. It's something to be jealous for. Dad's going to be locked and loaded when she gets older.
So I want you to also let the listeners know. So you had that miscarriage before Willow.
Yes.
And then there's Willow.
And there's Willow.
And then
somehow somehow, y'all, within about a week of deciding from the time the miscarriage had kind of completed to the time we knew we were going to adopt Willow, I got pregnant.
Woo!
So I was sitting in that NICU holding this sweet baby girl who's detoxing and feeling incredibly sick.
Wow. And it wasn't the flu.
After the flu was over.
Okay.
I mean, I actually wondered why the flu felt like it was lasting forever. And it turned out I was actually pregnant. So, yeah. About 8 months later, I had our fourth child. And we have, people call them Irish twins, right? Born in the same year.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there is Willow, and then there's Micah.
Yes.
And they're only 8 months apart.
8 months apart.
Right.
Yep.
They are beautiful, guys. They are so beautiful. So, Carrie, thank you so much for sharing that story. It's a very amazing story, actually, how you helped survivors. And I was sitting here as you were talking, and my mind got stuck on, well, just tell her to call me. I can talk to her. And I'm like, does Carrie ever know what she's going to talk about when she says, tell him to call me? I mean, does it ever dawn on you like, oh, what am I going to talk about? Or you just say, just tell them to call me and I'll figure it out when they call.
I think I'll just figure it out when they call. I mean, you never really know. And it could have gone so many different ways, you know, and I didn't really know if she just needed to know the resources in the community for moms on drugs and needed to be encouraged that she could do this, which is how I started. And that didn't work, right? Like, that's not what she wanted to do.
Right.
And then it just kind of went to the next thing and naturally was like, well, clearly you don't think this is your child and you've said that. And, you know, what do you want to do? And, I mean, ultimately, Sam is, you know, my hero because I can't imagine, and especially probably most listeners out there who have a child or a niece or a nephew or someone you love dearly, like, I can't imagine giving up that child. And, you know, Sam had been a mom, and so she knew what that was going to feel like. Right. To give away her daughter, and for her to do that knowing that she was going to have a better life or an opportunities that she couldn't give her is the ultimate sacrifice in my mind. You know, so for someone to feel like that was what her option was and that's what she wanted for her child, I mean, she's my hero, and it's really beautiful that that she would do that for her child. And so I was happy. If she was willing to do that, I was definitely willing to adopt her.
Yes, I love it. Such a beautiful, beautiful story. Thank you again for sharing your story with the listeners during Human Trafficking Awareness Month. Guys, this is a very special month that is near and dear to our heart, of course, because you know we are all about stepping into the fight to help end human trafficking. So before we leave, Carrie, if the listeners would like to reach out to us, how can they contact us?
You can go to www.reclaim611.org, or you can also go to support@reclaim611.org and shoot us an email.
That's correct. So until next time, guys, we encourage you to step into the fight. And this is Paula.
And this is Carrie.
All right, we'll talk to you all again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good job.
Thanks, girl. Kind of like